Welcome aboard, you guys. Looks like I see 20 on screen here.
Cool.
Everybody got happy with their view? You can see everybody?
Yeah.
Looks good.
Okay. I was thinking we were going to, unless somebody's got something else they want to do, I was going to start today with a little video, 5 minutes, of Doug and his ginormous platter. And not only is it fun to see Doug wrestling with this huge piece of walnut, there's also some nuggets in there about gouges, turning gouges for bowls and the like. And I thought that we could segue from that into a pretty good discussion of gouges. And just a preview for you, I have also, and I'll go to full screen when this matters, I'm set up here with my little cameras, and I can show you, a whole lot of tools quite close up once I make that screen big. So that's why I'm down here in the workshop today. And I'm using Zoom, which cycles through different windows when I tap my key, and now I'm back looking at you. Is that okay with everybody as a plan for this morning?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Then I'm going to start that little video if I can. Hang on a second here. I'm going to start the video. Okay. Do you all see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Here's Doug wrestling with his ginormous platter.
It's a branch, or it's either the branch or the root, but I got it from Ben Kaufman. A couple of pieces, these couple of pieces is one of the two pieces. It was 32-inch wide. Got that at 250 RPM. I tried my Ellsworth tool on this, but this 4040 gouge that grind that Trent Bosch recommended when we were doing his last demonstration, I find it works a whole lot better. I got quite a bit to turn down here. I'm looking for maybe half to 1/4 inch down in the center.
Can you pause it there for a second, John?
I sure can. I think I can. Just a second. Yeah.
Just back. Can you back up a little bit to where that tool was?
Yeah, and I'm going to argue that it's not a 40/40 grind either.
Right. Yeah, you can do that, but that's okay. Go forward.
I would ask what RPM?
250.
What'd you say?
250.
No. Is that what it was? I thought it was a bit higher than that, but yeah, it could be. Go forward a bit again. There, right there.
Okay.
The reason I want to speak to that is because the reason I like this tool is when you take a look at the angle I'm holding the tool versus the angle when it's cutting versus the angle that you'd have to have with the Ellsworth gouge on the to get a good riding the bevel properly on that one. To me, you get a much cleaner cut on that with because the blade angle is almost vertical as a shear cut when it's coming around, and so I have a much more stable. I have a much better time with a stable holding the handle. And when I tried with the Ellsworth grind on this, when I was using the side of the tool, the side of the grind, and it took almost nothing for me to have a catch, and and because of the fact that the it was on its side, I could not hold it steady enough with the twist of my wrist. So this is the angle of this tool means I'm using my up and down motion on my elbow as opposed to holding the twist of the wrist in order to keep that bevel against the tool.
Well, that grind you have there is what I think of as the old style long and strong grind, and it's a lot of people nowadays call a bottoming tool.
Yeah,
Okay.
Conventional grind.
Yeah, conventional grind.
Well, I took it back and I put it at 40, and I did it the way the angle that Trent did it, but whatever.
Yeah,
Well, even if you want to call it a conventional grind, whatever, but that's still.
Well,
anyway.
the reason it's not whatever is there's another grind called 40-40, and I'm going to show you that when we get after the video,
Okay.
and let's see if we can sort it out. I think that's part of the question here. Now, before I go any further, what are you guys seeing?
I think he's almost scraping. You're not.
No, he's cutting.
Shear cutting.
No, that's a
It's a shear cut.
conventional cut.
It looks
I
like a
do-
shear-
Doug, you're
looks like a
talking about
strip.
the long grind.
He's
Gouge. I
rubbing.
use a long grind and on the side, and I get pretty good cut with it.
Let me just a second. Are you guys seeing the stopped video large on the screen with a bunch of faces beside it, or what are you seeing?
Yes.
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 I'm going to start the video again and let's go on with it and see where it goes. It's only a 5-minute video altogether.
Yeah, that's not scraping.
No, that's
No, it's
definitely
not
cutting.
scraping.
So Doug, have any of these ever come off for you?
Come off? What do you mean?
Fly off the lathe?
No.
He runs with us. He's using a recess in the back and expanding the jaws into it. So that's pretty secure.
Hey, the reason I said that's almost scraping, I think it's because of your angle, is if you look at the final cut, it really is not a nice smooth cut.
Oh,
Look
that's
at him right there. The bevel's rubbing on that thing, not scraping. He's
John,
cutting.
on the original Jim, on the original picture, I was using more of a gouge cut, which wasn't smooth. This one came out quite smooth. I didn't show up close.
Okay, I was judging it by what I saw earlier.
No, yeah, you're right. It was different.
And he's not cutting. I think the thing to notice, he's cutting horizontally, not vertically. He's not cutting into the plate. He's cutting across the plate. And that makes a huge difference.
That's cool.
This is what a metal worker would call a facing cut.
Yes.
His nose bevel is actually rubbing on the area he just turned, and the side bevel is cutting the ledge that he created away with a shear cut.
Yes.
When the video's done, I'll give you the floor, Ernie, to say some more about that.
John, nice cuts on the editing.
I can't
That's
see more.
very nice.
And if I leave if I don't do it by touch, the first place I'll see the undulation on that thing is when I got the varnish on after final coat. That's going to take quite a while yet to do. I probably got to, by the time I go up to the side here, get rid of some of this stuff and then come back in again, it'll probably be another hour or so before I finish up.
This is the other platter.
I might add that that it's a lot easier to get that smooth bevel, smooth hollow through it when it's the grain is straight.
Okay, so a couple of things, a bunch of things I'd like think that there's worth talking about in there. First of all, Jim Bowman, I want you to see that I took on all your advice that I can on videos. That was a 540 video. and I cut out all of the camera waving around that I possibly could. Did that come through okay at your end?
Did, but I was noticing the resolution down. If you could try 720, it would make me happier, but maybe it wouldn't make Zoom happier.
That's the trouble. At 720, we start to get latency with this many screens on. So, okay, so back to those gouges. Doug, do you want to talk to that a bit? Or I think Ernie has some stuff, and I've got a bunch of gouges here as reference gouges that I can show on the other screen view.
Well, I would just say that Ernie's description of what I was doing was dead on, and I just, so for me, for that cut, and that's why I was commenting on it. It was just for me a whole lot easier to control on that face cut than any other. And I found on my bowls, even with doing the outside of a bowl, there are times when I wanted to do to make a really smooth finish, and I found that cut that's described where you're riding the bevel with the nose, but actually cutting with the side of the gouge just makes a beautiful cut. Why would I bother with all these angles? And with the Ellsworth gouge, I'm finding that I have all these awkward angles to stand at, whereas that one just makes a beautiful cut if you find the right spot on the tool without too much effort.
Well, I find that the Ellsworth gouge, if I'm trying to excavate a bowl, I can remove more material faster with that gouge than anything but except maybe a drill bit.
Oh, there's no question that the Ellsworth gouge has advantages for excavating when you're getting down inside the bowl. I'm talking about outside cuts more than anything.
Yeah.
It's the guy that promoted the 40-40 grind.
You're thinking of Trent Bosch.
Well, among
no,
others.
It wasn't Trent. There's another guy, but
it's Batty. It's Stuart Batty is promoting
yes.
that.
Stuart Batty.
Stuart Batty. He talks about floating the chisel, not riding the bevel in his demos. Well, and that makes sense when you're at a 40 to me.
Yeah. I find the 40-40 grind, as Batty describes it, is much closer to a spindle gouge. And I'm going to maybe give this over to Ernie right now because I know he's got quite a bit to say on this. Where are you, Ernie?
I'm right here, and I'm going to switch over to cameras here and bring them up. Yeah, you now ought to be seeing things in my lathe. And if I go to camera 2,
yeah, we see a spindle in your lathe.
Yeah,
and you're spotlighted, so it should be big for everybody. Am I right about that?
Yep, and you see a bowl. You see a bowl on the tailstock position, the outboard position. Yeah. Now, I was reflecting after we got off the phone yesterday, John, that I first met you at RIT when you were just graduating from SAC.
Yep.
And that was many moons ago. When we first started, the two books probably that influenced people the most were Practical Wood Turner by Payne, which taught you spindle turning, but not much faceplate work, and Peter Child's various books on turning. And the Peter Child's grind, I've got one that I bought a heck of a long time ago, and when high-speed steel came along, I retired it. But this was pretty much the Sorby forged carbon steel gouge. It was ground to about a 45-degree angle, as you can see, and they came actually square ground, but most of us raked them back just a little bit to get that corner out of the way on inside cuts. And this is essentially the tool that Doug was using a few minutes ago. And for shallow bowls, it is unbeatable. It cuts fast, it cuts efficiently, it cuts smoothly. Theory would tell us going against the grain, 45-degree angle for the top of the bevel to the work is optimum. That's where a hand plane is. And this tool achieves that nicely. I believe we both agree that Bob Stocksdale independently invented essentially the same tool for all of his work back in the day.
No, he was using much more of a ladyfinger grind, much more of what I think of as a 40-40 grind, the way the baddies promote.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I'll buy that.
I'm sure of it because I went to visit him back in the 70s.
Well, from that has evolved what people call the Irish grind or the Ellsworth grind, which is swept back quite a bit more, probably 50 to 60 degrees. I have Johannes Michelson's triple grind on this, but we did that for years by just putting a secondary bevel on by eye in the grinder.
That is not swept back as much as I would think as I've seen Ellsworth do it. The upper wing on that is about twice that length or 1.5 times that length.
Yeah, they get like this.
Like that, yeah.
And I quite frankly don't like that grind because the point gets so sharp that it's hard to get a smooth cut, at least for a student in this shop. But the students seem to get them this way without meaning to because they don't control their grinding that well.
Well, the nose angle on that is pretty steep.
Yep. Yeah. Ellsworth might have that 10 degrees at least less angle. It might almost be square on the end.
Yeah.
And the Ellsworth grind and the Irish grind, at least in my mind, are the same thing.
Yes.
And the Irish grind grew out of the Irish turning guilds in the late 70s, early 80s, I'd say. And I'm not sure we know who really invented it, but a lot of people have claimed it.
Well, neither of those is a 40-40 grind, though.
No, the 40-40 grind, I agree with you, is sort of a Stuart Batty invention. And
that's much closer to the Stocksdale grind, ladyfinger gouge with a 40-degree bevel included angle and 40-degree included angle in the horizontal plane.
Right. And it's also a real easy grind for people to do. So it's an excellent teaching grind.
It comes easily off of the Wolverine system.
Right. And again, the last thing you want to do with students is give them something too difficult. I was hesitant for years to show even secondary bevels because I felt they wouldn't learn to feel the primary bevel. But a few experiments threw that out the window. You're almost better to give them this grind from the start. And they do quite well with it. I generally, for a beginner, would make this more like 40 degrees, where this is more like 50 degrees at the moment.
That's very close to what I think of as a 40-40 grind.
Yeah.
But Ernie, your
With
point is well
flute.
made. Your point is well made about the point of that gouge with the Ellsworth gouge means that it's almost impossible. If the point gets too sharp, you have to really have it over on the side, use the side of it in order to ride the bevel at all. And then that starts to really influence your stance and stuff like that.
Oh, entirely. But again, the types of forms and the experience that David has allows him to do all of that. I'm somewhat the same way with, I'm more of a spindle turner than a bolt turner, quite frankly. But with spindles, I'll go in the house for lunch and I'm using such a light touch and feeling so much with the tools that I'll like drop forks on my plate while I'm eating and stuff because I'm not holding things solid enough. And so experience here makes a hell of a difference. And that's why for people that are not doing this as much, you have to go to safe, usable grinds. And the 40-40 achieves that.
One thing you guys haven't talked about is when you have that long swept back, you can do, what do you call them, shear scrapes, which you can't do with that 40-40.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you can. I'll switch cameras and show that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
If we're talking about the same thing. Oh crap! I don't have a tool rest over here.
Just hold it.
I'm going to have to take the lathe apart.
No,
to
just
get it
show us,
up.
just hold it.
I'll just hold it up on my finger showing what it is. But what you do is you put the tool on the rest like this, and you bring your rest up high, and you put the tool down and you roll it until the side bevel's cutting, and you just slide across like that and right on around, and you can leave a shear scraping cut. It's really a very aggressive high angle cut, and it saws literally through the end grain, and it'll save hours of sanding.
Well, could you, with that cut, eliminate the power sanding or reduce the power sanding that Doug had to do on that big platter?
Oh, incredibly. But on that flat platter, I would have not done it with the gouge. That's what I call the trick cut with the gouge. I would have actually used either this is a 1/4 inch spindle gouge, which is ground to a more medium grind, or on a platter that big, I might have actually used this 1/2 inch detail gouge, which is, as you can see, ground a bit more aggressive, probably a 30-degree angle, maybe 25. And I would have just come around like this, right across I'd have come right along like this across that platter. And as long as I'm riding this bevel and it's behind the cut, I will not dig in. I'll actually, once I start it, I'll roll the gouge very slightly so I get more upper edge involved, and I just slide it right. And as long as I keep the attitude, the angle from the work the same, that will make a perfectly level surface or a cone or a depression or whatever I want. But it is the way to get a tear-free cut.
I would add though that I did get a tear-free cut on that, and I understand your comment, Ernie, about the sanding. The issue that I had wasn't the smoothness of the tear of the cut. The issue is that my body itself, all it took is ever so slight a change in my stance or whatever, and you get a little bit of a ridge. I would say it's less than within the wavelengths of light type of thing, or a little bit, obviously a bit heavier, but you could feel it with your hand, but I couldn't see it in the cut. And that's that's my frustration, is when you look at a large platter like that across the light, you'll see all those ridges that you wouldn't normally be looking for. And that's why the sanding took longer.
Again, with faceplate work, it's not if you sand, it's how much you sand.
Yeah, that's right.
And the gouge across there, even if you get a ridge or two, will make the sanding less tiresome, because you just don't have that tear out. You've got to take up to a 30-second off the surface to get a bad tear out, where a little 30-second ridge you'll sand away right away. And another trick for those flat platters with a big disc sander like you're using, if you just make scribble marks with a pencil on it, you'll see exactly where the high and low spots are as you sand.
Yeah. Well, again, the video didn't show it. I didn't have much. When I finished the final cut on that, there wasn't any tear out that I could see in the smooth areas. There might have been a little bit up on the edges a bit more where I couldn't adjust it. But you're absolutely right. Getting rid of the tear out first is a thing, but then after that, yeah, go for it. Show us what you're going to show us on your spindle here. You've been turning us, making me curious, because I see your hand fondling a spindle blank.
Yeah, and I was going to show the other gouges. One thing that John and I are both very bullish on these days is a big roughing out gouge. This is a P&N from Australia, but I grind my roughing out gouge much steeper than most people do. It's down to 25 degrees. And it allows me to, let's come down into sonic speeds here. I'm turning about Now let's go a little slower. There's about 750. And this is old growth yellow pine. It's very hard. And you can see how it's going right through the corners. It's cutting beautifully. And I can bring this down and get a very smooth cut out of it. There, I have it smooth. And by just
I want you all, just a second. I want you all to notice that grip. Show us that grip again with your hand wrapped around the work. I find I'm doing that most of the time now. In other words, I'm holding the tool in line with my right arm. So I've got the power and the control of my straight right arm extension, but I'm controlling the tool with my thumb on top of it and my hand wrapped around the workpiece. And with that, as I might be able to show you in a couple of minutes, I can turn a spindle almost infinitely thin.
And I also am blocking chip path from my face with my thumb.
But you're more controlling the gouge.
I think it works better to fight.
Do you have your elbow resting on top of the headstock?
No. I do sometimes, but
I usually do for that cut.
But this juncture, I have a pretty darn smooth cut here. Now I can get it a little smoother with a SKEW, and I could, but I have a cylinder, which is harder to generate for a beginner with a SKEW, not for experience. And if I take a light final cut, I've got a pretty nice finish there. Now, we're both kind of bullish right now on the German SKEWs.
Now, I'd be cutting closer to the corner. You're cutting in the middle of the blade.
Yeah, this wood is very, very ornery. This is live theater, so you know I'd pick a bad flank. For this wood, you'd have to use a heel cut where you cut right like that.
But my point, my comment, Ernie, is that I've been with your gouge, your big gouge, held at the right angle. You can practically get a SKEW cut with the gouge, can't you?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I don't use a SKEW for that many planing cuts. And yes, I know it's going to work in that wood. This is a terrible piece of wood.
Well, the other thing to notice is that the actual geometry of this gouge is the same as the gouge that Doug was using.
Exactly. And I think you could probably use this for a final cut as long as the bevel is trailing the cut. That is, you're going across at a right angle across it. I think this gouge would have worked splendidly.
What do you mean? You said earlier, as long as the bevel doesn't get ahead of the cut. Explain that. That's a new concept to me.
If you put this down and you cut around like this, you're fine. But if you try to cut like this, it will dig into the end grain and rip the piece off the faceplate or break the handle on the tool, one of the two, maybe both. The bowl gouge really works because with the bevel trailing behind the cut, that acts as a safety device and allows you to cut on the ear of the tool or the side bevel of the tool, the lower side bevel, that ledge away, but it can't dig in because the bevel's rubbing behind the cut. And because of the way it's designed, you can use it. Again, students, as they get tired, start dragging this tool, or they start turning it like this and trying to use the side of the tool, and that will be a catch in the making.
So I usually do that. Show that cut again. How the correct way of doing it?
The correct way is it's setting down like this,
so
and
you're
coming
cutting
around.
Below the cutting point is below the nose of the tool, isn't it?
Yep. And on the inside cut, it would be like this. And as I come across here, I have to roll that tool counterclockwise to keep this bevel rubbing. And a lot of people start having a lot of trouble when the diameter of the cut gets to about that, because they get below the center line and it digs in. You have to hold that rock solid on the center line and just come right across like that. And to stay rubbing with the bevel, you actually have to slowly turn it counterclockwise.
Can you demonstrate that angle on the spindle, Ernie? When it was up close on your spindle camera?
Sure.
With your gouge.
This one?
The other one with the big gouge. Show,
this one.
show, yes. Show what you mean by the angle on. Yeah.
Well, see, in spindle work, you use this gouge pretty much right angles to the tool rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can see how much in this terrible wood, it's uncuttable with a SKEW chisel today.
Yeah.
But this leaves an acceptable finish. I'm going to have to sand it some, but I just grabbed this out of a scrap bin that I keep for classes, and it's really horrible wood. It's old, old yellow pine, but it's horrible. And I usually would be like this or like this. One of the reasons I think that wrapping your hands around the work with gouges and SKEW chisels like this and cutting like this is that you're not dampening the vibration with your hands back here. What you're doing is putting more pressure on the bevel, which actually on thin spindles, like John's going to show you how he turns in a couple of minutes, makes a heck of a difference. You're actually deflecting that spindle a little bit, and it cuts much better.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to gallery view here.
Ernie, I got a comment about your long grind on that roughing gouge. You brought that up a couple weeks ago or whatever, and the next day I had a spindle job I wanted to do, and I have a roughing gouge that I almost never use because I just have difficulty cutting with it. So I went back and I had it grounded about a 45 degree. So I ground it, I got it down almost 25 degrees, and it really worked beautiful. I used it the whole time on that job.
Yeah, but once somebody puts one of those in your hands or you decide to do it yourself, it's really, and it isn't any harder to use than the grind they come with, which is very steep. It's probably greater than 45.
Yeah, that really worked.
I have a question.
Glad to hear other people get the spam calls.
I have a question for you, Ernie. Should you be grinding your tools at a different angle for softwoods versus hardwoods?
I don't find it makes much difference. Theoretically, in bench tools, it can make a thing. I'm doing a bunch of wooden spoons right now, which I think I showed a video on a while back, but I am taking these out with gouges, and like I'm doing all right in the curly maple, but in this ash that I had laying around, a 15-degree grind on a carving tool is not holding up well in that. So 25 becomes about the minimum angle you can chop much wood. And if you're in harder woods like we have in North America here, you almost need 30 sometimes. But with a lathe, we generally can take a light enough chip that we can get away with 25 pretty nicely. And so I never regrind for different woods. And yes, I'm turning something so ornery, like I did a bunch of teak for a guy one time, and I had to grind everything to about 35 degrees to get through that wood.
Anybody else on this? More to say on this?
Yeah, I have a question. I have to admit, I'm one of the new guys compared to you folks, but it seems like with your hands so close to those extremely sharp tools, are we concerned about safety at all?
Well, I've made a few trips to the emergency room or done a lot of bandaging, so you should be.
I don't know. I just, maybe I hesitate to get too close. I try to keep my hands away from them because you've got your hand wrapped around the item itself and holding the blade down very close. And I don't know, I'm hesitant to go there. Maybe it's my lack of experience.
There's two parts.
Boo-boos.
Well, can I add two parts to that? First of all, you'll note that he didn't wrap his hand around when there's any square on that piece, right? So the cylinder is perfectly round to start with. The second thing, the second thing is that one of the things he's not showing you is that hold is so light and so gentle. If you're pushing into the tool, you're right about the catch. But when you have the hold on that thing so gentle, it doesn't actually catch very easily because you're running against a cylinder. So it's almost like you're holding a carving tool or something like that, as opposed to thinking about the spinning. From my perspective, when you're on that smooth cut, there's nothing to catch on. So it's mostly about the angle of the catch is what you're saying. So what we're trying to do is get the best angle to avoid that particular catch. Having said that, of course, there's always safety issues no matter where you got with that sharp tool, you know. But so far, I've actually, any injuries I've had on the lathe have not come from that holding the cut like that. They've come from a catch that was not well controlled or something else happening, but they've never come from my hand when the tool is smooth and I'm being gentle with it.
Yeah, I totally agree with Doug on that. I don't believe I've ever cut myself wrapping the hands. Where I cut myself is one, just mishandling a tool and getting that sharp edge. I'm picking it up and I drop it and try to catch it, or I back into it on my tool cart, or I drop it. I've had several times had to get stitches or a lot of bandaging on my leg because a tool grazed me going down to the floor. Not a lot of times, but 2 or 3.
The other thing,
there's a place here right on my knuckle that I work the way Ernie does with that German SKEW. And if I'm not too careful, I can catch my knuckle right there with the corner of the SKEW. And I have a little nick there now from something a couple of days ago, but it didn't bleed much, fortunately.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say in faceplate work, when you bring your tailstock back and you're working in here with gouges and scrapers, be sure to take the center out of your tailstock, because I one time backed into the center. It didn't hurt me, but it scared me. I mean, you know, it hurt a little. And I jumped, and the big scraper I was using went to the right in the bowl, came back around and slammed down on my thumb on the rest. And that hurt for 6 or 8 weeks.
Well,
I've tied a leather glove on mine. You know, if I'm just, you know, sometimes if I can get in close, just so I don't jab myself with that tailstock.
Yep.
I take the tailstock out every time it's not engaged. I take the point out of it because I think that's the safer bet. And boy, is that painful.
Yeah, I really yell at students if they leave the live center in the tailstock.
Yeah. Well,
I've got a couple of samples of gouges.
I'm going to spotlight you, Angelo. Hang on a sec. Go.
I don't know, anybody who knows Melvin Firminger, who knows his work, it's pretty odd work. And I came across the samples of his turning gouges that he gave or would sell to you for sharpening your own tools. This is what he calls a swept back gouge, and you can see that on.
Hold it up a bit. There. Thank you.
You went mute.
Sorry.
That's okay.
And on the right side, then, he's got it ground slightly back, but pretty much like a bottom gouge that Stuart Batty or Mike Mahoney would use. He uses this, believe it or not, to hollow forms.
He doesn't have a gouge with its wings ground. Like, that's just a sample, isn't it? That's not
This
the
is
actual
yeah, this is a sample. This is not the actual gouge.
Yeah.
He also has another gouge that he uses. This one he calls the scrapey gouge because he'll get inside a hole that's just a little bit bigger than the diameter of that and hollow out his work from the inside using a gouge rather than a hollowing tool. And the oddest one that he has is what he calls a nib gouge because it looks like the nib of a fountain pen. It's got a real sharp point there, and he rubs the bevel between the nib and the high spot on the gouge, and that's where he gets a shear cut on the outside of a bowl.
No, I would call that a gouge that was ground really badly. I mean,
yeah, I would say, but he uses it like a pro. So,
can you do that? Do you have a gouge like? Yeah.
Do I have one ground like that? No,
yeah,
I don't.
I would think that would be hard to learn.
It's not. It's an easy tool to use because it's got that little nib that gives you a long area of bevel rub before you get to the cutting edge. So it's a little bit more forgiving than you think.
I once did a course with Melvin Furniture, and I find this nib gouge is good for pieces where you've got the bark left on and it's not even, and then when you come from the air into the wood, the nib will kind of give you the direction of the cut, or makes it easier to cut into the wood and keep the direction. So for these purposes, with natural edge bowls, I think the nib gouge is a very good thing. But it's not a bad grind. If you want to do it properly, the way Melvin does it, it takes quite a long time to learn to do that freehand. So, yeah.
Yeah, you can't do that on a Wolverine jig for sure.
Yeah, you have to do it freehand, and that takes a lot of practice to get there. That's why he sells these pewter models of his tips.
I agree. And the 40/40 grind that Stuart Batty, Mike Mahoney, all those guys are promoting is good for the outside and about 2/3 of the interior of the bowl. Once you get past the 2/3 mark, you have to go to a bottom gouge. And that's pretty much what Doug was using on his platter to get that shear cut across the end grain.
What about scrapers? Would you ever do you use scrapers on a bowl or on a platter like that?
All the time. Yeah, absolutely.
Doug, you don't. How come?
The reason I didn't use the scraper is I was getting such a beautiful cut with the gouge. I said, why bother?
I mean, agree with that.
You know, when you get the angle right on it and you're getting in that slice, it's like Ernie. I mean, say, Ernie, why don't you use a scraper on your spindle? Well, the answer is because I got such a smooth cut. I've got the final cut I need.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with that. I've gotten to where I can do a pretty good cut on the inside of a bowl, but I still will go in with the scraper sometimes and just clean it up a little bit and take a few of the ridges off the bottom.
Well, that's
if I'm going to dig it. If I'm going to dig a channel in the bottom inadvertently, it's going to be with a scraper every time.
I use a negative rake scraper mostly.
Well, the scraper is, to me, kind of like a bayonet. If you can shoot the guy across the field with a rifle, do it. But if you run out of bullets, you got to resort to the bayonet. And it's kind of the tool of last resort, but it sure does some things. And it is the only tool that will make a machined fit like you get on snap fit box lids and things like that. Because all the other tools don't really make a perfect circle because they go up and down with the hardness of the wood and the grain pattern.
And
Ernie, I see you're holding a Jerry Glaser jig.
Yeah, this was the progenitor of all the jigs.
That's right.
And he sold these for about $75 in the day. And you rested it on the floor. You had a block of wood, you double side tape to the floor. You thereafter tripped over it all the time, but it worked. Tim Clay looked at that and said, well, I could make the one-way system, all on the grinder and easier. But Jerry actually gave you a double-ended piece of mild steel that had a spindle gouge on one end of it and a bull gouge on the other for you to adjust the jig to.
Yep.
Wow. I never saw one of those before.
Oh, come over. I'll show it to you.
It's for really old guys like us, and it's a relic.
It's a relic, but it still puts a really nice grind on the pieces.
It works splendidly. I think it didn't sell better because when you got it, you say, well, geez, I could have built that myself. I could have gone to the McMaster car, found all those handles and parts and just built it. But, it worked.
Yeah, but that's what everybody says, but that's not the truth. You can't build it yourself.
Well,
it's just like when woodturners look at other wood turnings, I can turn that. Well, no, you can't.
That's true. That's true.
Now you're talking like we photographers had to deal with at art shows. Oh, I have a camera. I can take that picture. I don't need to buy it from you.
No, you can't.
Yeah, they don't know an f-stop from a hole in the ground.
There you go.
By the way, back there for a moment, I thought you guys were going to mention that word nobody wants to mention, carbide, when you were talking about scrapers.
Yeah.
I'll comment for you, Jim. Carbide versus steel is the material, not the scraper. So it's how often you have to sharpen it, in my mind.
For me, carbide is really good for turning alabaster.
Yeah, it's splendid for that.
Anybody else?
It sells a lot more sandpaper too.
John, you haven't had a chance to even get to the angles you were going to talk about. We're almost out of time.
You've covered them all. What I will do, since there's about 5 minutes left, is I have a little video that arises from the Spindle conversations that I wouldn't mind showing you, if that's okay. It's also about 5 minutes, and it bears on this a little bit. So I'm going to share the screen, play the video. Are you seeing that?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is shot almost entirely with my overhead camera. And it's in, it's sped up. It's in 4:4 time, I guess you'd call it. This is real time for just a moment. This is the actual speed, and I'm turning. It's running about 1,000 RPM. I rarely turn faster than that. You can see the grip. That tool is in a straight extension of my forearm. And my knuckle is riding the rest. Now we're back to the sped up version. I'm making the tenon with a SKEW. I'm going to reverse the piece. Back to the overhead view. Bring up the tailstock. very lightly on the tailstock, but it's still there. And there's a finishing cut with the roughing gouge. This is the German SKEW. Now this is the same grip that Ernie's using with his roughing gouge, except my elbow is resting on the headstock. I got to say, when I first got this SKEW, I thought it was unworkable. And on some things it is, but on little stuff like this, the great big wide, it's a 1.25 inches wide, I find it does a very fine job. It's a lot of fun. But sometimes you still need the spindle gouge. This is a detail gouge. This is a 1/4 inch gouge. This is a 40/40 grind on that gouge. And this I was figuring out how to do. I'd never quite figured that out before, so I went back to the gouge for this one.
What is this German SKEW that you're all talking about?
That's the wide fishtail one I was just using.
Yeah, but what is different about it than a SKEW that I buy in the States?
It's thinner and it has a fishtail shape.
It's a fishtail shape.
Yeah.
Also got a rounded bevel on the edges.
No, that bevel's flat.
Yeah.
Bevel's...
on the side of the tool. The side of the tool isn't the side of the tool rounded, or is it?
No, it's flat. Okay. It's flat. It's thinner than a US gouge. There's the tailstock gone away. A little bit of sanding. And now we're getting it off. All right.
Do you have your German SKEW handy, John? Can you hold it up for us to see?
Yeah, just a sec.
Hey, baby.
Let me spotlight myself.
So Kai, tell me why it's a German SKEW as opposed to a French SKEW.
Yeah.
This is the shape of the tool. So you can see it's a fishtail shape. It's thinner than a US SKEW. It's about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 5/32 thick. On a mine, Ernie thought this is ground to about a 28-degree angle. Ernie generally grinds his to 25, and I've been sneaking my way up on that. So this seems like a ridiculously big tool to be using on a 1/2 inch diameter piece of wood, but I'm liking it a lot.
Where did you purchase
Where do you buy these?
I don't know. I found it. I got it at the symposium last summer. It's made by Crown Tools.
Yeah, the Gandys make it.
Yeah. A fellow named Colwyn Way, a Brit who's been promoting it, and I saw his workshop and I liked it, so that's when I tried it.
The original one comes from the Erzgebirge in Germany, where they do all these little Christmas decorations and stuff like that, and they used to hand forge these tools, and I guess that's the reason why they are thinner towards the tip and a bit thicker. The material is thicker at the end, at least in the original forged German ones.
Not by much, but yes. Yeah. There's a difference in thickness of maybe a 64th from here to here.
So I think they started off with a rectangular bar, and then they forged it. And by forging it, it got wider towards the tip, but thinner.
Yeah.
And I've got one of these as well, a hand forged one. I like to use it, but it's a bit harder to grind if you use a jig for grinding, because it's not the sides are not parallel to each other because it gets wider. It's harder to place it in a jig.
Well,
but
I'm sharpening it on a CBN wheel that has a flat side, so I'm just going right in.
You're doing it on the side, yeah. You could do it with a Tormek and the Tormek jig. That will work as well, but it takes a while to get the angle right, and it's easier for me to sharpen with the parallel blade, the skewed chisels. Sorry, but it's a nice tool, yeah.
I notice on this that the bevel on one side is a little longer than the bevel on the other, which shows you because I'm freehanding it. I'm not using a jig.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a Craftsman here.
What do you got there, Jack?
This is a Craftsman. It's similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah, but it's not skew. It's straight across.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're saying I would be better off to put a low angle on that?
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
Originally, that you have what it was originally called a Woodturners chisel. And it's a double bevel chisel, and it's the way they were sold in the 16 and early 1700s. But the tool makers soon learned that the user angled it to get it to skew. So the forces are trying to push this sideways all the time, so it's harder to use. By skewing the edge, you get the handle behind the cut, and you take the forces better, and they could use less steel to get the same length of edge. So everybody was happy.
And on that note, it is 11 o'clock. And before we wrap up, I want to remind you all that this is sponsored by Lancaster area Woodturners. Most of the guys on this screen are members of the Lancaster Club. Quite a few of us are members of both Susquehanna and Lancaster. And I'd like to invite those of you who are not members of the Lancaster Club, if you're enjoying coffee hour, to join us. It's not required. It's only $30 a year. And you can PayPal to me, or you can in the invitation, I think I gave my street address and where to mail a check, because I'm the Lancaster treasurer. And on
John,
that note, yeah.
Before we leave, I was wandering through the internet this week, and I found a YouTube video of a factory in Russia making Matryoshka dolls. You know, the little nested dolls.
I've seen that.
And their tools were super different from anything I've ever seen in wood turning. I think it would be very interesting to show the club, or get one of those at the club, a short one, to actually get people to comment on that, because it was like turning with a knife and stuff like that. And I would just like to get other people who haven't seen that to comment.
They hollow with a hook tool. It's very, very deft. Let's you and I collaborate and find one of those that we can show. It is extremely interesting. You're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Would you like to see the SKEW, the hand forged one?
Yeah.
Wow.
If you highlight me or spotlight me, I can hold it
working on that.
Camera.
Wait a minute.
Jack spotlighted.
I got you now.
Okay. So yeah, it comes with quite a short handle. Actually, I turned the handle myself, but that's the traditional short handle they use. So you can just grip it like this. Then it's thicker here, and then it tapers out towards the tip, and it's thinner here, and then it's getting wider. So that's the traditional hand forged tool. Yep. And I think the British manufacturer just picked up the idea and made something similar. Yeah,
that's right. That's
okay.
That's exactly what happened.
Schwarzwald? Is it made in Schwarzwald?
No, that is Erzgebirge. The company that makes it is called Steinert, and he had a smith who did it for him called Glaser, but this man died, and he doesn't make them anymore. So now he has got a new smith who does these hand forged tools for him. Yeah, I don't know whether they are still the same quality, but the old ones were really good. The only problem was the smith, he drank too much alcohol during work, and he had a liver damage, and that's why he died. So it's a bit sad story, but he made really nice tools like these, and also really nice hook tools and stuff like that that were hand forged, but he doesn't live anymore.
Did he go out on some good German Pilsner?
I don't know exactly what kind of alcohol, but I was told that he had a liver problem because of too much alcohol.
You made me think about this, Kai. I found in my dad's collection of tools a tool that looked exactly like that. Somebody had taken an old file and literally hand forged the end on it. I still have it sitting there. I didn't realize it was a special German tool. Now I'm going to have to try using it in SKEW.
Well,
it was just hammered out the whole file on the end.
I saw Jack Brubaker once make an acorn cup, or Jake Brubaker, using an old file that he'd sharpened to a round nose on one end, a hook tool on the tang end, and he had a drill bit welded to the middle of it, and he made the whole project with that one homemade tool.
Amazing.
And on that note, guys, we're over the hour. Thank you all for
everybody,
joining
have
us.
a good week.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good week.
We'll see you all next week.